Hi friends! Vladimir Putin has set his sights on an unusual venue for his next high-stakes maneuver, Alaska. The Kremlin has already been making pointed reminders that this US state was born in Russia and once belonged to it. Hints are becoming more direct, rhetoric more daring. Moscow is flirting with the idea of asserting a historical claim. The question is, how will Donald Trump respond to this bold move? But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you the most urgent global updates, exclusive conflict insights, and accurate forecasts you won't find elsewhere. For Putin, a potential meeting with Trump on Alaskan soil isn't just another diplomatic event. It's an opportunity to re-establish personal rapport, test American resolve, and inject symbolism into the optics. The choice of location is calculated. Alaska offers psychological safety for Putin, given that the US does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, removing any risk of arrest. Geography here doubles as strategic theater. Beyond security, there's a deep symbolic undercurrent. By referencing the 1867 sale of Alaska, the Kremlin is reviving a narrative of historical injustice. Yuri Ushakov, Putin's aide, poetically called Alaska an American born in Russia, framing the summit site as a reunion of estranged neighbors across the Bering Strait. These aren't idle flourishes. They are preloaded messages aimed both at domestic audiences and foreign negotiators. Putin is known for weaving history into his bargaining, portraying lost territories as wounds in need of healing. As always, the Kremlin couples diplomacy with muscle flexing. Just days before the planned summit, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov boasted about Russia's latest weapon systems and abandonment of its missile deployment moratorium, a classic tactic of intimidation ahead of talks. In truth, such statements often serve more as propaganda than concrete military intent. The underlying strategy is consistent. Frame the West as the obstacle to peace, and position Russia as the reluctant participant forced into conflict by unfair opponents. If Trump accepts even part of that framing, it's a propaganda win for Moscow. Europe, however, is unmoved by such theatrics. Leaders from France, Finland, Poland, the UK, Italy, Germany, and the European Commission insist that real negotiations can only follow a ceasefire or de-escalation, with Ukraine at the table and borders untouched by force. This conditional approach ties diplomacy to concrete commitments, preventing Putin from using talks as a smokescreen for prolonging the war. Kiev and its allies see Putin's only real bargaining chip as his willingness to keep killing. Any pause he negotiates would simply buy time to regroup. President Zelensky warns that Russia's goal is to secure at the table what it has failed to win on the battlefield, a strategy of attrition where lives are expendable resources. Western commentary hasn't missed the symbolism of Alaska. Former Bush speechwriter David Frum quipped that if Putin asked to take Alaska home as a souvenir, Trump might just hand it over. German journalist Felix Busiger notes that many Russian nationalists fantasize about reversing the loss of Alaska and Ukraine, an idea routinely amplified by state media figures. Economically, the theme is also being milked. One Russian academic calculated that if the Alaska sale price were adjusted for today's gold value, it would be around $1.15 billion, an enticing figure for those who romanticize reclaiming territory. If the summit happens, Alaska won't just be a backdrop, it will be part of the message. Putin will arrive armed with historical parables, shows of strength, blame shifting, and psychological pressure, particularly aimed at Trump's desire to be seen as a deal maker. For Russia, a peace announcement with no real substance would be a tactical victory, offering breathing room on the battlefield. Ultimately, this is about more than Ukraine or US-Russia relations. It's a glimpse into how Putin operates through symbols, manipulation, selective history, and calculated displays of force. Alaska is just the latest stage for this ongoing political drama, one that could test not only Trump's resilience, but the world's ability to see past the illusion of an easy diplomatic fix. If the Alaska summit unfolds as Putin envisions, it will be more than a diplomatic handshake. It will be a performance carefully choreographed for multiple audiences. For the Russian public, it can be framed as a symbolic reclaiming of status. The president standing on land once under the Tsar's domain, speaking as an equal, if not superior, to an American leader. For the international stage, it's a test of how far Moscow can push the boundaries of symbolism without crossing into outright provocation. For Trump, the optics are equally loaded. The former president thrives on moments that suggest he can achieve what others cannot. The idea of negotiating peace in the shadow of an old geopolitical grievance could play well with his political base, especially if the event is spun as a meeting of two strong, pragmatic leaders, cutting through the bureaucracy of diplomacy. Yet, the risk is that this framing could gloss over the strategic trap. Putin offering symbolic concessions while securing tangible military and political advantages. The real danger for the West lies in the perception game. If the summit produces even the appearance of progress, a photo op, a vague joint statement, a pathway to dialogue, it could fracture the united front that Europe and the US have built in support of Ukraine. Nations already weary of prolonged conflict might use such optics to justify scaling back aid, opening the door for Moscow to regain momentum on the battlefield. Strategically, Alaska offers Putin something rare in today's world, a stage where he is neither physically threatened nor diplomatically cornered. It's a reminder that geography and symbolism, when combined, can be as powerful as troops or tanks. In that sense, the meeting's location isn't a backdrop, it's a weapon in the Kremlin's arsenal. But the move also carries risks for Putin. Overplaying the historical narrative could backfire, reinforcing perceptions in the West that Moscow's ambitions extend beyond Ukraine, feeding fears of a broader revanchist agenda. This, in turn, could harden NATO's stance and accelerate the military buildup along Russia's borders. The Alaska Gambit is a microcosm of Putin's broader geopolitical playbook. Pick a setting steeped in symbolism, weave it into a story of past glory and injustice, project strength through controlled brinkmanship, and leave just enough ambiguity to keep adversaries guessing. Whether this strategy delivers tangible gains or simply fuels further confrontation will depend not on the pageantry of the summit, but on the subtle negotiations and the global reactions that follow. In the end, the Alaska summit, if it happens, could be remembered in two very different ways: as a fleeting moment of symbolic theater that changed nothing, or as the first act in a new phase of great power maneuvering, with consequences far beyond the icy waters of the Bering Strait. If the summit were to materialize, the immediate outcome would be less about signed agreements and more about the strategic narratives that emerge from it. In international politics, perception often outweighs substance. And that's precisely where both leaders have their strengths. For Putin, walking away from Alaska with even the faintest implication that Washington is open to reconsidering the terms of peace would be spun as a major diplomatic victory. Russian state media would broadcast the images of him alongside Trump against the backdrop of an American landscape that once bore the Russian flag, framing it as proof of Moscow's enduring relevance on the global stage. Even without concrete policy shifts, such optics could buy the Kremlin political breathing room domestically, allowing it to present the war not as a quagmire but as part of a grand geopolitical chess match. For Trump, the summit offers an entirely different kind of leverage. By positioning himself as the man capable of bringing Russia to the table, he could draw a sharp contrast with the Biden administration, portraying it as ineffective or unwilling to engage directly. Whether or not any real concessions are made, the narrative of a historic meeting could feed into his campaign rhetoric and bolster his image among voters who value deal-making over confrontation. However, the risks for both sides are considerable. For Moscow, even a symbolic meeting could unintentionally galvanize NATO unity. If European capitals interpret the Alaska gathering as evidence of Kremlin overreach, the alliance could respond with renewed military deployments, fresh sanctions, and tighter coordination on weapons deliveries to Ukraine, effectively undoing any tactical advantage gained from the summit. For Washington, the danger lies in the potential erosion of credibility. If the meeting is seen as legitimizing Russia's position without extracting meaningful concessions, particularly on Ukraine's territorial integrity, it could fracture transatlantic unity and alienate allies already skeptical of US foreign policy consistency. Beyond the West, the ripple effects could be profound. Beijing, watching closely, might interpret the Alaska summit as a precedent for using historical claims as bargaining chips in modern diplomacy, a principle it could apply to Taiwan or the South China Sea. Smaller states in contested regions might likewise take note, recalibrating their strategies around the idea that historical grievances, if packaged skillfully, can open new doors at the negotiating table.